So I've got to change the strings on this guitar, but since it takes a minute, I figured I would address a question that I've been getting a lot lately. So the question is from a lot of my students that I teach. For those of you who don't know, I teach music lessons on the side to some kids, and it's usually from the kids that are all about 17 or 18 and they're making a very important decision in their life. And that decision is whether they should go to college or not. So for anybody who doesn't know, I really love school, and I honestly always kind of plan on going to college. I mean, pretty much everybody in my family went to college. Most of them have their masters, some of them have their PhDs, some of them are vets. I mean, honestly, that just kind of always seemed like the plan for me. There's kind of an added layer of confusion when I turned 18. So flashback to when I was in high school, I ended up going to the school that was like rated one of the best public schools in Pennsylvania, and they like to boast that they had like a 99% acceptance rate to college and a 99% matriculation rate into four-year colleges. There weren't even really sports teams there, and I feel like a lot of the social climate was kind of predicated on what you were gonna do after graduation. Ouch. So I applied to schools like most of my friends, and I mean, I got into some pretty decent schools, but honestly, the weirdest part for me was that I was kind of in this weird like middle ground space of thinking that I wanted to go to school for music, but also really wanting to go to school for math and science. First 211 had over 100,000 subscribers, but at the moment we kind of just figured that it wasn't really enough for us to feel comfortable all just completely forgoing education. So we had decided that we were actually going to film videos remotely at that point in time. So with that in mind, I mostly just applied to programs that were kind of dual faceted in like music and science. I kind of learned later that for a number of reasons, one being just my personality and being somebody who gets very hyper focused on things at any given moment, taking that middle ground option of like kind of wanting a program that does both music and science was probably not the best choice. And looking back, I honestly would have rather just focused really intensely on one or the other. So at this point, I'm contractually committed to a college, and First 211 just gets an offer to go out to LA and work with Radio Disney for something. So we're sitting in the parking lot at the Radio Disney place, and we get this kind of suspicious looking email from this guy who would, in the future, become the label head and booking agent for Concrete Castles. So we get on the phone with him, and he explains that he wants us to sign to his record label that he's starting. I mean, as you can imagine, it wasn't a completely unanimous decision. I mean, we weren't the only ones in the room, too. Like, my family was in the room with me when this was happening. So it wasn't like everybody just immediately jumped on and was like, yes, 100% yes. It definitely was a little bit of discussion. So my parents were actually the ones that I talked to for the most part that kind of pushed me to want to take the deal. But the other very influential person, believe it or not, was Ross from the band Tally Hall. He called me on the phone and just told me that I'd be stupid to walk away from it. Side note, my high school was very upset that I did not go to school. They actually threatened to not let me walk at graduation. So the combination of doing pretty well on YouTube with some steady growth behind us and also a record deal on the table were enough to convince me that this wasn't such an uncalculated decision. The first couple months out of school were honestly pretty tricky because I felt a little isolated. I mean, I just gotten off this moving train with my friends of a shared experience, and now I was kind of just like the odd one out. Of course, now more than ever, people are making a living on the internet, and going to college is so expensive that retrospectively, it really doesn't look that insane. But you have to think from my perspective, it just seemed like so out of the ordinary. I was kind of breaking the mold in a weird way. Things were definitely starting to shape up though. We were still continuing to grow on YouTube. We were starting to write for our first record on this label. And I think that not being in school really pushed me to finally think critically about why I was so uncomfortable with this really weird limbo space. I was trying to ask myself a lot of big questions like who I wanted to be, how were people looking at me, did I care if they looked at me in certain ways, what was I gonna do to change that, should I even change it? So in the middle of trying to answer those questions and figure out what the was going on in my head, COVID happened. So our manager called us and told us the day before we were supposed to get on a flight to LA that it's probably not a good idea to come out there anymore. This is right when COVID had just hit its first real peak. So hearing that the entire music industry had kind of shut down was pretty freaky. I definitely went into like a small spiral because I just didn't know what was gonna happen. I mean, none of us knew it was gonna happen. We were just told that there was no touring, there was no recording. I didn't know if our YouTube channel was just gonna roll over and die too. I didn't know if I was just gonna not make money. So in the interest of safety, I actually reapplied to school. So I applied to college twice technically. And this time I was way more focused with what I wanted to do. This time, I didn't even consider music. I just went straight for math, and my personal interest was physics. So those were the two things that I was really interested in. And I feel like I just didn't want to do music because I'd realized that I didn't need it. I mean, I had already been, I guess, in the music industry like full time for about 2 years. And I had learned so much that I just realized that there wasn't really much to learn in school for me, at least the stuff that I really wanted to know. Just taking a quick second to acknowledge how privileged I am to have gotten this firsthand experience so far. I mean, really, I think a lot of people who are considering music school, if they had the choice to just be signed immediately for like a professional deal, would probably take that. I mean, the firsthand experience is hard to beat in my opinion. And that's certainly not to discount what you can get out of a formal music education. I think the hands-onness of what my experience was like was very helpful for me on a personal level to just get from point A to point B, seeing how all the behind-the-scenes stuff works for how producers really work, how labels work, how collabs work, whatever. So before I actually applied to schools, I actually did enroll in some courses at the Harvard Extension School just to get myself familiar with the stuff that I was really interested in. So on a complete technicality, not really, but on a technicality, I did go to school for a year, which was definitely a lot of work. I mean, to be honest, when people talk about their COVID experience, how they were like really bored out of their minds, it's just hard for me to imagine because my experience was the complete opposite. I just enrolled in school and I was also like in my full-time job, like filming these videos with First to 11. By the time that I actually heard back from schools, the music industry did not really open up as far as touring goes and writing goes, but First to 11 had hit this kind of like growth spurt online with doing 2 videos a week. So my anxiety started to calm down. I knew that I wasn't going to be in like deep trouble. So with that in mind, I actually deferred my admission to UC Berkeley, which was the school that I committed to, so I could go back whenever I want to. I feel like the ultimate answer to why I didn't go to school is really just because it turns out I didn't need it in order to pursue what I wanted to do. I didn't have to spend that kind of money and go get the education for it. If I had wanted to pursue STEM stuff like math and physics, like I said before, then I probably would be in school, because it's a little bit harder to learn that stuff when you're not in an institution that teaches it. But ultimately, the hardest part was really just figuring out that that's not what I wanted to do. And I really only figured that out when I got out of school, and I was kind of by myself. When I say by myself, I really just mean that I wasn't in that environment that I was in when I was in high school, where it was just very hyper fixated on going to school. And I don't think that that's inherently such a bad thing. I think if anything, the conversation now has just spun around to the fact that you really just don't need it for everything. I mean, honestly, I still really love school, and I would definitely consider going back one day when it made more sense. But I still learn every day. I mean, I learn from the people that are my mentors in the music industry. I learn from the people in First to 11. I learn from fans. I learn from everybody how to do my job better. So something that I try to do for my students sometimes is help them answer that question. What do you want your life to look like? And some of them very honestly tell me that they like the position that I'm in, and they're curious if it's possible for them to be in a similar one day. I personally got incredibly lucky to be where I am. I worked hard, but honestly, it was just so much out of my control luck that ended up falling on me. But I think I've shown a lot of my students how to not rely so heavily on that luck and to more strategically position themselves in a way to do what I do for a career. Showing them skills like how to play multiple instruments, or how to produce their own stuff, or how to start a YouTube channel. You know, I think that my parents actually think I'm going back to school like very soon, which is a little weird because I've explained it to them a few times, but they didn't really grow up with YouTube, so it's not really their fault. But I try and teach them as much as I can so that they understand a little bit more about my job. So for those stuck between a rock and a hard place, unfortunately I can't make a decision for you. But I can give you some advice, and that's to maybe think long and hard about what you want your life to look like, which seems obvious. I get it, but I really didn't give myself enough time to think about that question. I thought I did, and I thought I knew it, and then I turned 18 and I was out of school, and I was just back to square one. I had no idea what was going on. And honestly, after that, if you're still stuck between two very different realities that each require their own very specific protocols and life plans, then maybe you should ask yourself if one of them is harder to come by. I knew that I could always go back to school, but I knew that the opportunity to take a real stab at YouTube with a big following and try out this record deal thing was going to be pretty rare. Right now, I kind of feel like I should probably revisit that question once I've cemented myself a little bit more in my industry, get a little bit more established, which who even knows if that day will ever come. But until then, I'm still pretty happy with my decision and I'm going to stick with it. So good luck to all the high school seniors out there. You're going to be just fine.